Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
Hey, if you're still with us, there's a good chance you're in the fantasy football playoffs. And for that, congratulations, and maybe you're welcome. So it's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Welcome in, everybody. Brian Drake from FightingChanceFantasy.com. Joined as always by the analytical assassin, Dwain McFarland. You read all his great work at Pro Football Focus and EstablishTheRun.com. Dwain, it's kind of a crazy thing here, man. We're recording this live on a Tuesday. We've got a football game going on as we speak. Your Dallas Cowboys are on the air. What are your thoughts here doing a show while watching a legit Cowboys game on a Tuesday? This is wild.
Mostly I just need the Ravens defense to score 5 more points to cinch another one of my football guys players fantasy FFPC football guys players championship teams. I need to get in. I just need 5 more points from the Ravens D. So they just went up 24-10, so hopefully the Cowboys feel like they need to pass all the time and I can get some sacks or a pick six. That's what I think.
This is going to be a fun show. We've got, obviously, this game going on for the folks joining us live on YouTube, and we really appreciate that, everybody. We also have a Syracuse basketball game, which if you know me, you know I'm a big fan of, so I've got that on another screen over here. And we're getting ready for the fantasy football playoffs. You know, the waiver wire is not dead. We're going to talk about a few guys tonight who I guarantee are on most wires out there who I think could really help you going forward. So kick back, relax, crack one open, let's get rocking and rolling here, Dwain. So let's see. If I could get through the 8,000 screens that I have open, I could get to what we're talking about first. Oh, wait. We're going to talk about the jersey that I'm wearing right now, Carson Wentz, because he just got benched. Jalen Hurts is going to take over for Wentz. He had 5 carries for 29 in mop-up duty there in the second half. Threw the ball 12 times, only 5 completions, but did throw for 109 and a score. Gets a tough matchup, Dwain, with the Saints this weekend, does Jalen Hurts. So let's kind of just break this all down. There's a few layers here. One, what are your thoughts on picking him up, maybe 2-quarterback league, or just maybe to block him from somebody else? And then let's get into what he may do for Miles Sanders and Jalen Reagor and all these Eagles skill position players. So thoughts initially on the Hurts move?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be a really deep league to want to have anything to do with Hurts. I think he could give you some value on the ground with his legs. From what I saw last week of the game, he honestly doesn't look very good. Doesn't look very accurate, which he wasn't in college either. He really wasn't good at Oklahoma, even though he put up some really good stats. I was honestly, and I know you covered this the night that the Eagles drafted him. Mm-hmm. I was very surprised that he was a second-round NFL pick, to be just bluntly honest. So I don't think this is a good thing as far as the Eagles go, even with a potential upgrade if he happened to be one over Wentz. It's just such a mess right now, Drake. Over the last 2 weeks, it's really just turned into a complete rotation at receiver. So, for example, over the last 2 weeks, Alshon Jeffrey is now up to 54 and 53% of the routes. That's bumped Jalen Reagor down. He was up at the 91, 95 marks. Now he's at 59% and 63%. Travis, the once great Fulgham, was at 84 and 95%, now at 49 and 44%. Hey, you got to get John Brown involved. He's a super duper playmaker, Drake, 29%, 37% of the routes. Greg Ward, your closest thing to an every down receiver, 66% and 72% of the routes. So it's just a mess, man. They're rotating everybody through. You got bad quarterback play. I just don't see, I'm to the point, I was kind of telling people where you were just already saying just dump everybody like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Really, you were right. People at this point, I wouldn't hold any of these guys. I could care less about holding any of them. I don't see any reason to keep them. Even if Hurts starts to establish a connection with one of them, it's just too much of a rotation, man. I mean, I don't see the point in rostering these guys anymore. The only one would be Miles Sanders. He's a low end RB2. He just needs the offense to play better. He's still got big playability, so he could pop for you at any time. The other one that I would continue, starting if I needed to would be Dallas Goedert, but you saw his routes drop from 98 and 97% down to 65% with the return of Zach Ertz. So even he's questionable at this point.
Yeah, if you saw Sanders, 10 carries, 31 yards. That's coming off 6 carries the prior week. I mean, it's bad. So everybody's going to ask, and we have guys in the chat room here asking the question, can Hurts and his running ability, and maybe they're going to do a little more RPO action, inject some life into Miles Sanders? And I guess theoretically, yes, but we don't know.
Be worse.
Yeah.
It can't be worse, right? Yeah, but I mean, I see Sanders versus Chase Edmonds next week. I'm still going Sanders, over Edmonds. I think he's just got better volume, upside. Yeah. So Chase is still locked into a very narrow range of outcomes.
So if you're all looking for another quarterback out there, and by the way, Jalen Hurts only 5,100 on DraftKings this week, so very workable in a lot of lineups. How about Baker Mayfield? We've talked about him. Baker stinks. Baker's good. What a monster week he had. Really just a monster first half, just dropping the hammer on the Titans this week. Gets a tough matchup. He's got the Ravens coming up this week, but really if you're holding Baker in kind of the streaming fashion, week 16, championship week, he gets the Jets. What did you see out of Baker this week where everything just happened to work for the Browns?
Baker plays in a great offense with a lot of great play action. Teams are concerned about stopping the run, and he played within the confines of the offense, and they made things very simple, and he hit his throws. I mean, look, you can go back historically and look at, the quarterbacks that play in this kind of scheme, and I did a breakdown on this last year it was either on one of these or on another pod. I can't remember if it was one of ours or not.
Whoa. Other pod.
But I actually I broke down, really like the hit rate on these quarterbacks in this Kyle Shanahan / Stefanski / Gary Kubiak offense. And what happens is you usually only get 3 or 4 big outings out of them per year, but when they hit, they're really big. It'll be like these 4 and 5 touchdown games. And so it makes guys like Jimmy Garoppolo, Baker Mayfield, even Kirk Cousins, which has done it multiple weeks in a row now. Now, Kirk Cousins really has the benefit of a terrible defense as well. So he's kind of got to keep throwing. But those kind of guys that just every so often, they'll just hit and they'll have these huge weeks. It typically makes them nice DFS, stack darts on weeks where you think they're going to be lower owned and you want to go above, what you think the masses are going to be on ownership on a guy like that, just to give you some exposure. But as far as week to week in DFS, man, I don't trust it. Against the Jets, he may need to throw 10 passes. Like they could literally run the ball 35 or 40 times and score 30 points against the Jets. So I think it's tough to trust Baker at all. The efficiency could blow up at any point. I don't like the idea of putting Baker in my lineup in a season-long playoff situation. I like him in a DFS tournament. That's the way I would look at it.
Another guy who's under 6,000 this week's Phil Rivers, 5,900. He's got the Raiders and Texans the next 2 weeks. Now, he's got a foot injury or an Achilles or something like that, so I thought I read he's going to have surgery in the offseason, but he's a statue anyways. Here's the thing with Rivers. He's throwing the ball nearly 40 times per game over the last 5. He's brought some life back into T.Y. Hilton. We'll talk about him when we're looking at receivers to possibly add. He's got Michael Pittman and all these wide receivers out there. But, hey, Dwayne, what are your thoughts on Phil sitting out here throwing for nearly 302 every week?
I mean, Phil's a fine streamer. They're throwing the ball more now. You get into these matchups where, they're forced to – early in the season, they had a lot of easy matchups, so he just wasn't forced to throw the ball very much. But, yeah, you look over the last 6-7 weeks, he's dropping back plenty. He's pushing 300 yards almost every week. He's going to throw – typically he's going to throw a couple of touchdowns. He's still got the upside to give you 3. So I think Rivers is fine as a streamer, especially if your team – obviously, if you're starting Phil Rivers and you're in the playoffs, your team is really good in other places. Yeah. That's not your strength. That's not what you're built around. So really, Rivers is the perfect kind of guy for that situation. You just completely punt it at quarterback. You're really strong at running back. You got your receivers rolling. You just want somebody that's not going to give you a complete dud. We're kind of to that point now where it's, Rivers pretty much avoids the duds. I'm not saying it couldn't happen. It can happen to anybody, but we know that he's going to get the passing attempts. He's got a few different receivers working now. He's got some different options that have, a little bit of sizzle to their game. Kind of in the middle of the year, their receiving core seemed really blah, and it seems to be coming around a little bit now. So I'm fine with Rivers.
All right, folks, let's get into it. You want to talk running backs? We got to get through the obligatory quarterbacks. Let's get ready here. There's some juiciness on these waiver wires, Dwayne. Now, it's some guys we've talked about in the past. I'm not going to act like I'm reinventing the wheel here, but Cam Akers, he's a guy that shows up in your utilization report. You, of course, read that over at pff.com or establishthерun.com. Cam Akers is only owned in 53% of Yahoo leagues. When I saw
which honestly is amazingly high. Considering how bad he's been. I can't believe he's even owned that much. As
21 for 72 and a touch, gets the Pats on Thursday Night Football. Didn't practice today. McVay came out and said his shoulder should be okay. But Dwayne, this is a season high in snaps, carries, rushes inside the 10. He had 7 of them. I mean, there's good things going here for Mr. Akers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I look at, it was a very drastic change from the week before, and it wasn't just driven by a game script. The Rams led in this game. They were close, almost tied in this game, and they also trailed at periods of time in this game. And if you look across all of those situations, Akers was fine. Now, Darrell Henderson was a little bit dinged up. That would be the only caveat, but he came back. He played in the second half of that game, even came in and had a really good run, in the fourth quarter. And so, it looks like right now Akers is probably going to be the new first and second down back. He's not getting the long down and distance and the 2-minute work, but 2-minute, we can't really say they didn't have to run that part of their offense. But he did, out of all the backs on the team, he saw the most snaps out of the no huddle, which can be a precursor to 2-minute work. So he's got a little bit of meat left on the bone, potentially in the passing game as well. Heard early on in the season that McVay was going to ride the hot hand, so he could very easily switch back a different way in a week or 2-3 weeks from now. But he also has said that if he found a back that was really going well, they would prefer to run everything through, one back. So there's still always the upside that Akers could turn into that, right? You don't go into it expecting that or counting on that. In fact, you say that would probably be the exception. This is most likely going to be a committee the rest of the year. But given the way he was used in the no huddle, it's showing me that they trust him to know the playbook. They trust to have him out there, in situations where you got to think on your feet, you got to be able to do things quickly. And he's on the field. So I think there is upside for him to be involved more in the passing game if they determine that really he gives them the best chance, of breaking big plays or consistently gaining the yards they want to gain on the ground. So I think he's a low-end RB2 coming into this week. It's not the best matchup in the world, but it's not terrible either. And then I think he's going to have those weeks where he can give you the RB1 upside. If he remains in the committee, he's still going to give you those RB3 weeks, as well. But you just kind of have to live with it at this point. If you're picking him up off of the wire, and let's say you're dealing with an injury, or you're dealing with just a revolving door at your second running back spot, I think Akers is a guy that could give you something here over the next few weeks.
I wonder how many people listening live to us right now are just going back and forth like, oh my gosh, I need this to happen. I need 10 more yards from Zeke. I need 2 more catches from Amari Cooper. I need Hollywood Brown to come through with a touchdown.
Probably not many. Most people that own those players are losing. They're already out of it. Honestly, like if you own Zeke, most likely you're out of it because once Dak went down, his season was over. Lamb, you could be in a situation, but most likely you've benched him, by now, and you found a better replacement, especially in this matchup with a supposedly good secondary. My guess is that the largest number of people are probably banking on the same thing that I am, which is starting Baltimore's defense or Justin Tucker. That's probably the 2 people that people are most, interested in tonight. Lamar Jackson, maybe, but he's also somebody. If you spent a second-round pick on Lamar Jackson this year, you're not happy. You're not happy. Mostly you got saved by the fact that there were so many other busts in the first and second round that weren't quarterbacks. That may have helped you some. But, man, there's so many quarterbacks that are outperforming him by a mile that you didn't have to draft as high as him.
Yeah, and that's as we go through the offseason, we'll get into, draft plans and kind of some lessons learned. Maybe we'll touch on a few things here today. But that's just such a great topic, is going back and looking at your drafts and your plans and saying like, oh man, I really wanted to get that edge at quarterback, and then seeing what, Lamar Jackson did to your roster because you invested such a high pick in him, and he, did nothing for you, frankly, for most of the year. Here's a guy, Dwayne, Nobody owns this guy. He's 1% owned, maybe 0% owned in 3% owned in Yahoo. I'm sorry. Where else can you go out and find a guy who rushed for 100 yards, got 22 carries, caught a couple of passes the week before the playoffs start? And I'm talking about Ty Johnson of the Jets. Yes, the Jets suck. They're awful. They're terrible. But look at those numbers. Look at the opportunities. Holy smokes.
Yeah, I mean, you just need for Frank Gore to be out. The other thing is, they only had two other backs. They had him and Adams. Your former Eagle was the only other running back, available. So we often see when teams suffer an injury with their lead runner, they'll actually, the way they handled their, two backs that week will be very different than when they have three active the following week. So we'll have to wait and see. Adam Gase has had a knack in the past for using multiple backs. So we'll have to see who they elevate from the practice squad. We'll have to see if Frank Gore's back from his concussion. All of those things are in play. If you're in a deep league and you just really need somebody, and we see that Gore's not going to play, fine. You can use him, but man, it's so hard to trust. Yeah, he had 100 yards, but it was against the Raiders, who are one of the worst run defenses in the league. They're actually a worse run. They're a worse run defense than even their stats show. Like when you watch the game, the line of scrimmage just gets pushed so far back, and this has been going on like since the beginning of the season. Their run defense is terrible. So that was a big help, to the Jets. So I would consider him an RB3 moving forward. That's if Gore is out. Like if Gore is back, obviously you just don't even bother with him. Gore would then be your RB3 for the week.
His next 3 games at Seattle, at the Rams, and then home for Cleveland. Now, folks, you also have to remember with these guys, Akers, Ty Johnson, J.D. McKissick, who we'll talk about here, and some of the wide receivers, maybe even if you're not going to play them, if you've got a spot on your roster, make sure nobody else in your league can play them. You don't want Cam Akers going off on you in the fantasy playoffs because you said, I don't need him. I have enough running backs. And meanwhile, you've got, Miles Boykin on your bench or some scrub wide receiver that you're never going to play, Travis Fulgham. Get rid of those guys. So any thoughts on, playoff roster construction? It's a word we throw around a lot in the preseason, but it matters going into the playoffs here. So there's 3 weeks left in your season to crown a champion. Anything you want to impart on the folks? Maybe like, hey, go out and look for this, add another defense, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends, on the league.
Talking like you're at home league with your buddies.
Yeah, I mean, but it just depends on the setup. It depends on, when your waivers cut off. Are they still going? Do they stop at some point? And it depends on what's available. Depends on your roster. I mean, it's kind of a tough, question, but I would say you just gave some really good advice. Anybody that you can cut off if you've got something that's expendable and you've got, say, more free agents dollars, or you're ahead in the waiver wire, order, and you can go grab a guy like Cam Akers so someone else in your league can't. And you gave a perfect example. You've got somebody like a Fulgham, a Rager, somebody that you're just like, Josh Reynolds, all saw his snaps fall off the face of the earth. Guys like that you can cut. That maybe you were just kind of stashing and saving them for a rainy day if you had an injury to another receiver or something like that. Yeah, you make those kind of moves and you add the guy like Akers. If you need to cut somebody off for Ty Johnson just for this week, you're playing a guy that doesn't have an RB2. Ruthless is the word I would say. Be ruthless. It doesn't, do everything you can. You should see these leagues. We've talked about it a little bit, but whenever the playoffs get here and I'm dealing with these FFPC leagues and stuff like that, I spend so much more time on my moves because I literally study my opponents far more. I go look at their roster. I see what they need. I see how much free agent, dollars they have. I look at the rest of the league to see how much help I might get on the wire that week versus do I need to do it all? 1 week, 3 weeks ago, I think I told you, in an offline conversation, I cut 4 players just to pick up 4 quarterbacks so my opponent couldn't have one. And then I dumped them all the next week back into the pool, and I picked up the other guys that I needed. But it worked out. It was a league where I had a bunch of money left over. I hadn't had to make a lot of cuts all year, and I had to make one a couple of tough cuts that I didn't necessarily want to make, but I wanted to make sure that I absolutely got into the playoffs, which was my number one goal. Mm-hmm. And so you've just got to be thinking through those things all the time. And again, at running back, you can never have enough, right? This season has taught us that as much as any other season in the past. You can never have enough. And it's the position where one guy can come in and all of a sudden for 2 or 3 weeks just give you magic, right? And then he can just disappear. But it doesn't matter. If you got to use him for that 2 to 3 weeks, especially at this time of year, that can win you a league. And that's very well what Cam Akers could be. So he needs to be on your roster and no one else's, no matter what.
That's really good stuff there, Dwayne. I appreciate you said that. Talking about working against your opponent, studying your league, seeing what the other guy has to do. If you're looking at your opponent and they're streaming quarterbacks, and you've got an opportunity to scoop Mayfield and Hurts and whatever, do it. Don't let your opponent get the edge on you. Really good stuff there. I like that. Quick question from the chat room. Is Gio Bernard cuttable? Now, Gio Bernard in a half-point PPR doesn't have over 7.5 points since before their bye week 8. That was week 8. He had 21. He hasn't done anything since then. 12 carries for 30 yards this week. What do you think, Dwayne?
Yeah, the Bengals suck. I mean, really the only person, the only person that I would even consider, and this I don't even like, right, starting would be T. Higgins. And I don't even want to be starting him. I mean, I cut T. Higgins in an FFPC league last week because now nobody can pick up the players you cut.
Oh.
Once you get to this point in that format. Mm-hmm. And so I cut T. Higgins because it was on a roster where I had like 8 receivers and 6 of them are really good. Even though he's done great, I really love him. Most people in the format probably are still not cutting T. Higgins, but looking at my roster, I needed other things. And so I chose to go ahead. I cut T. Higgins just to carry an extra kicker just in case my kicker gets hit with COVID. I mean, now I didn't do that on every roster, right, where I had T. Higgins. So again, it depends on your roster, but yeah, Gio Bernard, man, you don't want to be running him out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it depends what you have behind him. If literally you have nothing, well, and he's your RB2, well, you've got to start him. But if he's your RB4 and you need to get stronger somewhere else, or you're looking for upside, absolutely cut Gio Bernard. He's the kind of guy that if someone else picks him up and starts him against me, and he, for some reason, goes off for 25 points or 30 points and beats me in the fantasy playoffs, I will just live with it because the odds of that happening are like less than 1% because that team is so bad. And I don't know. I don't have their schedule up in front of me. I know they get the Cowboys this next week, which could be, they could probably run on the Cowboys because everyone can. So that would be the only one. But I think after that, I don't know. Yeah, see, like that, I could care less. Like if somebody wants to start Gio against me and he's playing against Pittsburgh and they look at that as their savior for their season, I'm probably going to send him a side bet, just to encourage him to play.
Hey, jumping into the chat room here, Ben Kukanis, operations director from fantasypoints.com. We talked to all those guys, John Hansen, Graham Barfield, Joe Dolan, with a Go Rutgers message to us here. Rutgers playing Syracuse down in New Jersey right now, that game heading to the half. So, yeah, don't come into our chat room and talk your Rutgers smack. Let's see, another great question here. Dwayne, are you finding a way to squeeze Cam Akers in over disappointing guys like Chark? It looks like is that A.J. Brown and Claypool?
Surely it's not A.J. Brown.
No,
so,
maybe that's Antonio Brown.
I don't think that AJB.
AJB.
Justin, clarify in the chat.
Yeah.
But as far as Chark goes for Akers, again, it depends on my roster. Most likely not. Like I think Chark is a wide receiver 2 this week. He was a wide receiver 2 last week. He ran around on 92% of the dropbacks, had over 100 air yards, and Glennon's back there cutting it loose, man. Like he's not a great quarterback. But whenever he was interviewed and asked, before his first start 2 weeks ago, like, well, what are you going to do? He's like, look, man, I've been in the league a long time. I've tried to play it safe. Screw all that. I'm going to go out here and just jump the football. And he has. And
Yep.
so that fits with DJ Chark. Chark had 7 targets last week, could have easily had a couple of passes that he just missed on where he could have showed up nicely in the box score. So Chark's a guy that I look at as a solid wide receiver 2 this week. I'm going to use him in a ton of my DFS stuff. Well, I got to see where the ownership's going to come out. But, if it's in the 10 to 15% range, I'm definitely going to be over the field on those. So I don't really want to give away Chark, but here's what I would say. If you're sitting at running back and you're looking at it, let's say you've got an RB1, let's say it's, Cook or Dalvin Cook, or it's Chubb or Henry, whoever, you've got an okay RB1, but let's say at RB2, you're really shaky. Maybe you've got like a Mostert and you've got, a Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then say, your next back after that is like kind of like just a complete scrub like Gio. Mm-hmm. And at receiver, let's say you've got 3 wide receiver 2s or better, and maybe a really strong wide receiver 3 after that. In that kind of case, I might do it. But again, I'm going to look at my opponents because Chark's going to get picked up, and he is the kind of player that could come back to burn you in the playoffs because he's still got the talent, right? It's just he hasn't had the luck factor go his way because of some of the quarterback play and some of the injuries that he's dealt with. He's just kind of had them lingering on and off. That could show up for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns against you on your opponent's team, in a playoff game. So Chark, I'd rather not. Did he ever clarify who?
It was Antonio Brown.
Antonio Brown. I'd be more likely to do it with Brown and maybe even Claypool, to be honest. So Claypool, here's the deal with him. This last week, essentially, he had taken over that third receiver role, was seeing 70 to 80% of the routes. And earlier in the season, he had been splitting that with James Washington. It went back to a split this last week. And really, Washington, played pretty well. Not that he outplayed Claypool, but he showed up in the box score. He had a long touchdown reception. So if that continues, Claypool will turn into an unstartable asset. Now, I'm not dropping Claypool anywhere. Again, it depends on your league. I say I'm not dropping Claypool anywhere. I think about the leagues I'm in where I can't really make Claypool anywhere. I can't make that move. But what I would say is, if I could make the move, I would do Claypool over Chark. If I felt like I had to do it. But Claypool is another player, Drake, that will be quickly picked up. Yeah, and it could hurt you. And think, like, if this week, here's the problem why that's really tough. Say this week, Deontay Johnson got hurt, and he's been hurt a lot, or Juju got hurt. Like, you're gonna feel terrible if you drop Claypool, right? Because the guy, I mean, if you look at it, he's really had one bad week. Who knows? He could show up on the injury report this week, right? A lot of times these players that have this kind of thing happen, all of a sudden come Wednesday, we see, oh, he didn't practice. We never even knew, but like he had his back tightened up on him in the game, and you don't even know it happened. I looked for it earlier today. I Googled Claypool, week 13, injury, hurt, left game. Like, I always Google all those sorts of things when I'm doing the utilization report just to see if there's something driving that. Yeah, and I couldn't find anything, but again, I prefer to not drop those upside guys. I know that it does come down to tough decisions. So if you absolutely have to do it to get Akers in your week at running back, then yeah, I'm fine with it.
Our pal Ryan Reynolds from ETR jumping in to the chat room saying, how do you guys feel about the Giants being in first place? Embarrassed or thrilled that Dave Gettleman may get to keep his job if this continues? So, interesting point there. I'll tell you, from my perspective, I just want the Eagles to get a top 5 draft pick. I don't care who wins the division. I don't care anything about that. My focus is get a top 5 draft pick. God bless the Giants fans. I hope you win the division and get smoked in your first playoff game. But that's my thought. Dwayne, how about you?
I'm with you, but who knew that the NFC East would turn into a juggernaut where the Giants would beat the Seahawks and the Washington football team would beat the Steelers. What a crazy last couple of weeks. But yeah, I'm with you. I just want the higher draft pick. My mother-in-law texts me. She always texts me when the Cowboys are coming on because she's a huge Cowboys fan. She's like, woohoo, go Cowboys. And I tell her, like, Well, they really need to lose because we need a better draft pick. She does not like that. She doesn't want to. She just wants to root for the team this week, which is awesome. Like she's that true kind of fan like that. So we go back and forth. But yeah, I'm totally good with the Giants getting into the playoffs and getting their freaking wheels blown off. Same thing for Washington. The sad thing for Washington is losing, Antonio Gibson going down with a toe injury. That really sucked.
Yeah, really. And we're going to get to that next. But first, I wanted to let's see if I can do.
I just need a pick 6 out of the Ravens, Drake. Come on,
let's go.
I'm down by 4 points for this one other FFPC team I want to get in.
We got Andy Dalton back here. He'll hook you up.
I got 7 minutes left. Yeah, I just need Marcus Peters to jump one of these weak-ass out routes.
Oh, man. Hey, if you're watching live on YouTube, and why wouldn't you be, you're going to see on the screen right here, our friends at Viridian Global have helped us put together a Fantasy Football Hustle t-shirt collection. So you want some sweet swag for Christmas? Tell your wife, tell your girlfriend, just go buy it yourself, man. Go over there. If you're following us on Twitter at FF Hustle, it's the pinned tweet. Otherwise, just go to viridianglobal.com and you'll see in their collections, I got all kinds of fantasy football ones. Look for the Fantasy Football Hustle. That's VERIDIAN global.com. They're really cool. They've got our current logo. They got our old throwback logo.
Man, I'm digging that third to the right. The black with the kind of the brown and gold one right there. The old school. Man, I'm liking that.
I bought that, to be honest.
Oh, is that the one you got? Yeah.
I
think
bought
that's the one I'm gonna do.
Yeah, I bought one of those. And then you see here, we got the 3/4 length Hustle baseball shirt. Pick your color, pick your style of Hustle logo. You can change the colors, do all kinds of crazy stuff. The shirts aren't too bad, starting here at $26. So if you want to support Dwain and I, you want to look cool, stand out. We're going to have other shirts coming. I got such a sick shirt for you, Dwain, coming down the pike. It's awesome. I talked to him already. Wait till you see this shirt. Every analytics bro in fantasy football is going to buy this shirt once this thing comes out. Yeah. So head over to viridianglobal.com, help Dwain and I out, pick a shirt up. And
and a ton of you have reached out, and I really appreciate you, like through DMs, multiple ways, LinkedIn, you name it, and just have asked like, hey, Dwain, how can we better support you guys? Is there somewhere where we can pay through Patreon, all these things. And we haven't done any of that stuff yet, like for a reason. We're really trying to grow our brand. We just want to continue doing the best thing and bring you guys the best content that we can every week. And eventually we'll do some things like that. We just didn't think the time was right, but this is the perfect opportunity. So if you guys do want to give back to the show and you still get something out of it for yourself, and the shirts look pretty good, man. And plus it helps, just get people thinking about, more people get eyes on seeing the hustle. We really appreciate all the support you guys have given us. So if you want to help us out, grab a shirt.
It's the best sales job we've ever done right there, Dwain.
I don't think I've ever pitched anything before. So
no,
there you go.
Good job. So yeah, the shirts are cool. I actually bought some. It's not like Dwain and I get them for free. We have to buy them ourselves. I sent the link to my mother-in-law, and I'm like, "Hey, you're looking for something to get me here?" Fighting Chance Fantasy's got a little store on there too, so we can rock and roll with that. So okay, we're talking fantasy football here. You might need another running back. So if everybody was on this Antonio Gibson train, the train might be coming off the tracks because he's got a toe injury. And if you think back to a lot of guys, look at Randall Cobb, AJ Green had this a million times. This turf toe can linger for like 3 to 4 weeks.
Yep.
Lots of guys get this. I don't expect Antonio Gibson to play this week.
Yeah, I don't either. Because when you get hurt and they can't give you an injection for you to come back in the game, which is typically with something like this, you'll see the player try to come back in because while it's still loose and limber, it hasn't stiffened up yet. They'll give him a shot. They'll finish the game. He couldn't even do that. Mm-hmm. So my concern, I'm not a doctor. So, I know there's a ton of great content out there. You guys know who these folks are. But I've been reading some similar things, online. I'm pretty concerned. I don't think we're going to see him this week. It really sucks. He's on 4 of my point chase teams in the championship round of the Football Guys Players Championship. So he'll be on my bench. I lost 2 Will Fuller teams as well. So, and 2 of those are where they're on the same team together. So that's definitely going to hurt. But I don't think we're going to see him. As far as Peyton Barber, though, man, it's really hard to get behind it, Drake.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the matchup, with the Niners, I believe, this week. And Barber hasn't been terrible, but again, game script is still very fragile. People had thought Antonio Gibson, they just jumped all in. We talked about it a little bit last week. His utilization still hadn't changed. He essentially had a perfect game script, and he had been playing a little bit better. He hit some big plays against the Cowboys. Oh, surprise, surprise, because everybody hits big plays against the Cowboys. So it's a situation where I really don't want anything to do with Peyton Barber if I can avoid it. I consider him an RB3 low end heading into this week if Gibson's out.
How about J.D. McKissic? We've spoken about him numerous times here on the hustle. He's only owned in 49% of Yahoo leagues. This he got 10 of 10 targets this week for 70 yards. Only rushed 5 times, but who cares about that? He's basically a receiver playing running back. If he's out there, folks, take a look. Half of you, if Yahoo's correct, he's available in your league. So
I need a review on this pick. J.D. McKissic, yeah, we've talked about him before. You need a trailing game script. If you get it, you get 10 targets. If you don't, you get 2. So he can be an RB1 or he can be an RB nothing. It's just it depends on the way the game goes.
Let's go over to wide receiver now, where Kiki Kuti was a guy we talked a lot about last week. Only owned in 27% of Yahoo leagues. Boy, did he come through for us, Dwayne. 9 targets, 8 catches for 141. Exploded out of the slot, where if you read Dwayne's great utilization report article, you're going to see how he's getting tremendous matchups against linebackers and safeties. So thoughts on Kuti? He's obviously still available in a ton of places. Why wouldn't you want a piece of Deshaun Watson?
Yeah, I think Kuti is a guy that you really want to own. I still consider him a wide receiver 3 for now. And here's why. Because whenever they're running 12 personnel, Kuti was not on the field except for whenever a few plays Brandon Cooks was out. Chad Hansen.
That's the guy we're going to talk about next.
Yeah, Chad Hansen was actually out there more. He was out there for 92% of the snaps, I believe 94% of the routes on the week. I'd have to go. I don't have it right in front of me. This is like just my memory, but it's up in the 90% range. He led the team. He also saw 19% of the targets. He saw the deepest average depth of target, so he was getting the vertical looks. This is a guy was a 4th-round pick in 2018 or 17 by the Jets and flashed a little bit there, but it's the Jets, right? Things didn't work out. And so he came to the Texans. He's actually bounced around a bit, and he was on their practice squad, got called up. Not like a ton of pedigree or anything, but he could surprise. I mean, I'd rather own Kuti out of the 2, but would I be surprised if Hansen actually ends up being the one that's more valuable? In the end, I think this is still a play for Brandon Cooks, right? He kind of got, lost in the shuffle a little bit this week, but not from a targets perspective. Those were still there. He just didn't come up with the plays that we've seen recently, but yes, they both should be owned. Consider Hansen a wide receiver 4, better just as a stash this coming week, but hey, he might help you out, the week following, in the playoffs. And then Kuti, you can start him. Just be aware that they like to use a lot of 12, a lot of 13 personnel. They like to rotate through these tight ends. There's still a chance that Kuti, if the script, if things stay close, they don't trail, they happen to get ahead, any one of those scenarios, we could see Kuti in a situation where he doesn't quite put up what we thought, that he would.
Chad Hansen owned in 0% of Yahoo leagues. Super sleeper for sure. T.Y. Hilton, is he back? I mean, Dwayne, this guy's 30% target share in week 13, finds the end zone, and he's got back-to-back wide receiver 20 performances. Can we trust him, though, in the playoffs? I mean, this guy was dead up until 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, as far as T.Y. goes, I mean, he's obviously, he's on a little bit of a heater, really more from an efficiency standpoint. The week before he was kind of lucky if you look at, his targets and his routes and all those things, to put up the kind of production that he did. This past week, yeah, he saw 10 targets, but that's only the second time this year when he's even reached double-digit targets. He had 31%. You have to go all the way back to like week 5 or 6, the last time that he had a 30% target share. It's like we talked about before. This team is going to be balanced. They're going to spread it out. They really want 4 or 5 different players to see 15 to 20% of the targets. I think you're going to continue to see that. The issue with Hilton is that he also sees his routes drop down below the 80% mark. This last week, he was 87%, but the 2 weeks before, 77% and 78%. So that can be problematic, right? You got to be on the field at the right time, and his targets per route run are not any higher than his actual target share. So if you look at targets per route run, and sometimes if they're higher than their actual target shares, that can show you that, when they are on the field, they're scheming, trying to design things for them. So you can kind of be like, okay, it's fine. They run a few less routes, but when they're out there, they're really trying to get on the ball. That's just not the case with Hilton. His actual targets per route run are actually lower in a lot of cases than his actual target share. So he's a guy that I think he's a nice player. We know he's a good player. He's done things in the past. So I think, if you're in a deeper league or, maybe a medium-sized league where you have to start 3 receivers and maybe you have 2 running back starters and a flex, he's in that flex, conversation. Maybe he's in your wide receiver 3 conversation, but don't get like crazy with him as like a wide receiver 2. I still think he could easily go back to his 4 or 5 targets, only comes up with 2 of them for 40 yards. I think that is the most likely scenario in his range of outcomes. If you made me like put a bet down on where does T.Y. Hilton land, it's most likely in that range. Now what is helping him, I think, the most, Drake, is that Pittman is demanding more love from defenses. And so Hilton is getting some better from a quality perspective, right? The types of coverages and everything he's seeing. He's a little bit of the forgotten man. He hasn't done anything all season. Pittman's been showing off a little bit the last 3 weeks. He's had a couple of plays where splash plays where he's, made a big play. And I think that's helping. So Hilton's fine. Just don't get carried away. I think is that low end wide receiver 3 in larger formats. If you're in a small format, he really shouldn't be in your lineup still, unless you're just really, really hurt.
I got to tell you, Dwayne, I'm loving this new quiet mouse that I bought. This isn't like an ad we have for the quiet mouse. It's just I bought this because I get so annoyed with the click, 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 click when I was doing things during the show. I went to Staples and I'm like, hey, listen, you got one of these quiet mouse things? They're like, oh, yeah, it's not in stock, but we can send it to you. I'm like, all right. The guy's like, it's $17. I go, sold. Send it my way, my friend. I love it.
All right. Need a Devin Duvernay touchdown for a return. That score just put me down by 9. I was down by 5. Duvernay. Oh, you're going to go for the onside kick. Recover and a touchdown.
I mean, it's only a 10-point game. There's 4 minutes to go. So
yeah, I just need a pick 6.
We'll see what happens.
All right.
Let's keep grinding here. Somebody asked why we always reference Yahoo instead of ESPN or CBS. I think ESPN gets enough love out there in terms of all their platforms. And I just think Yahoo's a superior platform. I play on it a lot, so it's easy for me to look up. And a lot of other people do too. Question, Dwayne, who would you go for on the wire? Akers, T.Y., or QT? Again, it probably, if you don't need any of them, I mean, I'm always going running back, but that's just me.
Yeah, it's like, so if you need to start somebody this week and you're like, I have to depend on them, right? I think QT is still the guy that I would depend the most out of that group, but they're all close. Then it would be T.Y. and then it would be Akers as far as a trust factor, right? But as far as if I feel good about all my starters and I just have somebody I know I can cut and I want to stash a player that could, really, flash big upside for me, I think it is, depending on your roster, which position you're stronger at, running back or receiver. I would say Akers gets the slight edge for me, but I wouldn't hate it if you went QT if you told me, well, my receivers I feel like are weaker than my running backs. So I think it's I like both of those guys over Hilton.
In our chat room, someone asked about Gabriel Davis from the Bills. He's somebody that I've been on for weeks and have been adding and dropping from my Scott Fishbowl lineup. And, Davis came through on Monday night, came right in 3 for, let's see, I would do 3 for 68 in a score, only had 4 targets. John Brown's going to miss at least the next game. It's against the Steelers, but that could have shootout potential. It's tough. He's wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, something like that. Thoughts on Gabe Davis in a deep league?
Yeah, I really don't like this matchup. I don't want him in my lineups if I can avoid it this week. But yes, I mean, he's essentially, what's happened is Cole Beasley has really taken over. They've just kind of rearranged the offense. It's Diggs and Beasley right now. with John Brown out, and Gabriel Davis is essentially getting the 4 to 5 targets that Beasley used to get, right? When John Brown was in and Beasley was the only one getting her 4. So they've just really reshuffled the deck a little bit. Beasley's the player I like more, obviously, moving forward, especially in matchups like the ones with the Steelers, because he's protected in the slot. Mm-hmm. And he's just the guy that, when you've got really good coverage going on, he's the one most likely, to spring free. But overall, yes, I like Davis. I think he's got big play upside. For me this weekend, though, he's best served as more of a dart shot, like in a DFS. I expect his ownership to be really low because of the matchup, but that doesn't change the fact that his air yards are there. He's got a quarterback that's playing at a high level on a high octane offense against a Steelers defense that isn't probably quite as good as what we give them credit for. They've definitely shown some cracks in the armor. It's not like anybody's blown them out, but it's also not like they've been just completely stifling, right, against better passing games. So that's really where I would trust Davis. I really don't want him in my season-long lineups unless you tell me you're like in a 16-team league that you got to start 3 receivers. Well, then great. Gabe Davis is a wide receiver 3 all day in that kind of format.
Tim Patrick, another guy who might be on your waiver wire, only owned in 21% of Yahoo leagues, caught 4 for 44 and 2 touchdowns. So a guy to check out on your wire. Other guys, take a peek out there. Alan Lazard, Cole Beasley, these guys, we kind of talk about them here and there. Denzel Mims. I want to talk about a tight end or two here, Dwayne, before we get out of here. How about this Cole Kmet in Chicago? Nobody owns him, but he's really kind of blowing past Jimmy Graham in terms of his snap share. And, he's scoring a little bit now, getting some targets here. It looks like he could be maybe the second target here in a terrible Bears offense, but if you're dead or you're in a 2 tight end league, tight end premium, you know what I'm talking about. Cole Kmet, anything worthwhile?
Yeah, you basically need to be dead. And in that case, then yes, you could use him. To your point, he has passed Graham from a standpoint of snaps, routes, targets, all of it. Like, he's the tight end 1 and Graham's now the tight end 2. That happened a couple of weeks back. Another plug for the utilization report, called it out there ahead of time. He's a tight end 2, but with a score like any tight end on a week-to-week basis, he could pop into the tight end 1 range. So if you're completely just, scraping the bottom of the barrel and you're in a really deep league, Cole Kmet's a name that most people aren't paying attention to, that he could come through with 3 or 4 catches, maybe 40, 50 yards and a touchdown for you.
All right, let's hit a few questions here from the chat room, Dwayne. Kyler Murray, should I be worried or just adjusting from injury?
I think both. He's adjusting from injury and you should be worried. Because without it, look, he's my quarterback 2 in Scott Fishbowl. I have him and Patrick Mahomes together, and that's really, that's my ticket. And I'm worried. I don't feel really good about Kyler Murray at this point. There's always the chance that, his clavicle, or AC joint, is what it was, gets fully healed and they're fine, with him starting to take hits. There's always a chance that really right now they're just cutting back on the design running plays, for Kyler Murray. Actually, yeah. I can pull that up. Hang on one second. I didn't look at that earlier today. It's a good question. So for Kyler Murray, because I can break it down into, his scrambles versus his actual designed running plays. So hang on. I'm filtered down to just the last few weeks. Give me 1 second. Live on air adaptation here. Okay, so I got it up now. So Kyler Murray, week 6, 7, 9, his rushing attempts were 7, 10, and 6, were his scrambles. Out of those, scrambles were 3, 3, and 4. And then also week 10, 7 rushes, only 4 of them were scrambles. Over the last 3 weeks, we saw 3 rushing attempts, 2 of which were scrambles. 2 rushing attempts, both scrambles. Now, last week, he did have 4 rushing attempts, only 1 of which was a scramble. So they were a little more willing to call some running plays for him last week. So there's a chance that he's just recovering, and we could see him, get more opportunity this past week. I think this is a detail that a lot of folks are missing. What you're hearing, the narrative you're hearing on the national level is if you can stop Kyler Murray from running and that's what you choose to do, well, that's how you beat the Cardinals. Well, it's also been since Kyler Murray's been hurt and they're not calling design runs for him. So you still may not be able to stop Kyler Murray rushing the football whenever he's fully healthy. We don't know that yet. So, I mean, if you own Kyler Murray, yes, you're worried, but are you going to bench him? Probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have to have, like I might bench him for like Tom Brady, this weekend in a really great matchup, like with the Vikings, that should be a shootout, something like that. But even then, man, it's the kind of deal where you do it, Drake. And as soon as you do it, you're like,
that's a move I would do.
Yeah, you're like, oh, he was just hurt. He just ran for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns and threw for 302 passing touchdowns, and I suck. So with Murray, you're going to have to stick it out. But here's the good thing. Mostly it's really hurting just him and Christian Kirk. That's the two guys that's hurt the most. It hasn't hurt DeAndre Hopkins as much. It's actually helped Kenyon Drake because Kenyon Drake's actually getting the carries down inside the 5 where Kyler used to take a lot of those. So if you're a Kenyon Drake owner, as long as we think Kyler's still dinged up, he's got a little more upside than he normally does, right? Once Kyler's back to full strength, and if they're calling design runs, which they may not do the rest of this season, it could be that kind of injury where it's they're just maintenance, right? Just trying to get him through it. They don't want to see him take another big hit. But they got to be getting close to the edge, Drake, of where they're just going to let it all hang out because they're in danger of missing the playoffs now. Right. So the Cardinals are going to have to just really let it all loose. So I think we would see that this week, if they're going to do it. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert. That's, I'm not basing that off of anything really than I just know they need to win, so they can do whatever they want. But I think it is a positive that last week we did see 3 design runs, whereas over the 2 previous weeks, we only saw 2.
Kurt Miller in the chat room asks, safe to start Mostert this week against Washington with how involved Jeff Wilson was against the Bills?
No, I don't like it. Mostert, over the last 2 weeks, we've seen him have about 40 to 45% of the attempts, and I think that's his role. I think Kyle Shanahan's happy, as always, to rotate 3 guys, 4 guys, 5 guys. Bring in a guy out of the stands, at halftime, let him drink a few beers, let him get a few carries. You just don't know, Drake. So Raheem Mostert will have an RB1 finish within the next couple of weeks of fantasy, 3 weeks of fantasy playoffs. I just can't tell you which one it's going to be because it's going to be touchdown dependent and he's going to need a long run, right? Mm-hmm. Or you're going to need one of the other backs to get hurt, which happens all the time. Right. And then all of a sudden, you get, it gets trimmed down to a 2-man backfield instead of a 4-man backfield. Right. Because last week you got Mostert, you got Jeff Wilson, you got Tevin Coleman, and you got Jerick McKinnon. I mean, so now you have all 4 players healthy. So Mostert's in a situation now where I think it's just kind of tough. I consider him a low end RB2 that's touchdown dependent. I feel better about him as an RB3. As a flex play in a deep league. If you're really hurting at RB2, you can do worse than Mostert, right? He is in a good offense. He does have big playability, and it is the type of offense that any given week could just rush for 300 yards, right, across a couple of backs. So you do have that going for you, but I do think it's tough to predict when he's going to give you a big spot.
Absolutely. Folks, if you're still playing, you're in the fantasy playoffs, and that's awesome. We're happy for you. Hopefully we were a little part of that, and we appreciate you hanging out with us all fantasy football season long. And we're going to keep rolling through the playoffs. We're not done here. We're going to keep churning out content over at FF Hustle on Twitter. Dwain is at Dwain McFarland, DWAIN McFarland. I'm at Drake Fantasy. We're also on Instagram at FF Hustle. And of course, go check out those cool shirts, man. Those are really sweet. ViridianGlobal.com. You can find FF Hustle in there. So good luck, everybody. Hopefully you guys are advancing. Dwain and I are moving on in the playoffs in the Scott Fish Bowl. We'll have all that info for you next week on a brand new Hustle on Tuesday night. So for Dwain McFarland, Brian Drake, never get out hustled, folks. Take it easy.